to go. All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Brian Wheat, and I'm with the Small Business Development Center out of South Carolina State University. And I have with me here today Sam Norton of Heron Farms, the founder of Heron Farms. And we're going to be learning a little bit about controlled environment agriculture, particularly seawater agriculture, and how Sam got into the business, what Heron Farms does, the products they offer, and a little bit about how one might pursue this particular industry if you are interested in that. Before we get underway and hear from Sam, I would like to thank the South Carolina Department of Agriculture and the ACRE program for sponsoring this particular webinar. And we have Kyle Player, who is the executive director of that program, on board with us right now. Kyle, I wonder if you might want to just briefly give us a rundown of what ACRE offers and what ACRE provides.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm excited to have Sam on today. He's one of our original awardees from way back in 2018, and he's been a rock star ever since. So we're very happy to just be a small part of his progress and everything. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him today. But just really quickly, so ACRE runs 2 grant programs, an advanced program where you already have an established business, and you submit an application and a business plan with the opportunity to pitch, and you can win all the way up to, Sam received $50,000 in 2018. You can receive $25,000. Brian Wheat is even a former awardee. He got $5,000 for his loofah business. And then we also do a curriculum program where in the fall we team with Clemson Extension, their agribusiness team. And we help folks that are looking to start a business or have just started and need some help getting going. And we actually help you create a business plan and a pitch, and you have opportunity to win money there too. So we give out usually 5 to 6 $5,000 awards for that. Everything we do is free of charge. And we're looking for new entrepreneurs every year and innovative folks. So you're going to hear from one of our best ones in just a little bit here. So please, Jim has all my contact information. So reach out if you're interested in either program. Like I said, the advanced one's in the spring and the curriculum one's in the fall. So thank y'all, and looking forward to hearing Sam.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kyle, for supporting us and providing that programming. You know, like you said, as somebody who's participated in it, it really is a great opportunity for folks that are thinking about getting into the agriculture industry and or expanding their business. A lot of resources are offered and a wonderful network of folks. You know, we all stay in touch following that program, and I really think it's helped elevate agriculture in South Carolina. And so thank you. You know, without any further ado, I'd like to just dig into it, Sam. I've had the thank you. I've had the opportunity and privilege of knowing Sam for quite some time. We used to kind of share a space in another building here as Sam got started pursuing his passion in the business of growing sea beans using saltwater agriculture, seawater, saltwater. And so I've gotten to see his business change over the years, and I'm really excited to get a chance to speak with him today. But Sam, tell us a little bit about how you got into the business, what you guys do, and things of the sort.
Thanks, Brad. And thanks, Kyle. Wouldn't have anything without ACRE's help in the beginning, so thank you. Excuse me. This was started back in 2016 as an undergrad at CFC. I met some folks that were doing seawater agriculture at Boeing, and they were growing plants, these salt-tolerant plants called halophytes for biofuels. And so they would, they sponsored a large project in the UAE where they were growing these halophytes with seawater and taking the seeds and pressing the oil out of them. And so I wrote my undergraduate capstone on that. Got to meet some folks in that program, and I just thought it was pretty neat that you could do agriculture with seawater. Never heard of that before. So anyways, I heard from chefs in the area that they were familiar with this plant, and I realized that this was the same plant that I had grown up eating on the coast of South Carolina. And it goes under all sorts of different names like sea pickle or sea bean or samphire. But it's one of these halophytes that is getting a lot of attention because you can grow it at scale with seawater. But what I found as a grad student and acre funding helped towards many of these experiments, is that in our outdoor experiments, we found that there were some production issues. And they came down to the same three that we identified in some of the larger outdoor programs, which were land use constraints. If you want to do agriculture with seawater, you've got to be near the coast, and a lot of people live near the coast. So this led into the second constraint, which is that mega projects would choose these areas that were deserted, like Eritrea or the UAE, and they would have no people on the coast, but it would also have no rainfall. And so they would pump in seawater, and the annual evaporation was higher than the annual precipitation. And so they would build up salt in the soil. And even these plants couldn't handle it after a couple of years. So we started seeing their yields decline. And the third problem with doing it outdoors was seasonality. In our latitude, these plants flower in July as the days get shorter. And that made it not possible to produce year round for chefs or Whole Foods. And so that led to experiments indoors to try and solve those three problems and do seawater agriculture year round.
Excellent. So you're taking something that oftentimes is a burden for folks. You know, there's a increase in seawater inundation and rise in sea level. So you're taking a scenario that could be posed as a problem and looking for ways to work around that or work within it in a lot of ways. So Heron Farms, you kind of glossed over that the halophyte in the product. Heron Farms grows and sells sea beans into the produce market, correct?
Yes.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about your product. So you've gotten to the point where you've identified the plants, how it behaves a little bit, and now you're selling it to chefs and restaurants.
Yeah. We use the southeastern regional moniker called sea beans,
okay.
But now we're actually selling into the Northeast under a different name called samphire, which is the more common name in Europe and in the Northeast. And so depending on where we're selling it, we're actually using different trade names for it. But the product, sea beans are in the same family as spinach and beets in the amaranth family. And so they have similar nutritional composition, except they're salty. And so it's like eating seasoned spinach or something like that. And it's also a succulent. So it's 98% water. So even it's like biting into kind of like ocean water almost.
Yeah, I just had a sample, a dried sample earlier today. It tastes kind of like the sea.
Yeah, it's 40% salt.
Yeah, amazing. And so through identifying the crop and doing a little bit of research, it was supported to some degree through the acre program. You looked at the challenges of doing it in the outdoor environment, and we're selling that particular product, or doing R&D with that particular product, being grown in the outdoor environment. You sort of got to know some folks in a different industry and transitioned your business model to a large degree to indoor agriculture, right? So tell us about the process that you went through there.
Well, what you had said earlier about treating seawater, which is a problem in some areas, as a resource, we're starting from the first principle that seawater and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are basically free resources. And if you add light and you add a plant that's salt tolerant, you can basically just do photosynthesis. You get the products of that, which are food or fodder, habitat, oxygen, jobs. This room creates fresh water. Also, salt water comes into the plants, they transpire oxygen, it's condensed into water. But indoor ag is we determined was the right model for this latitude, but not necessarily for, there are growers that are in Hawaii or Mexico that don't need to go indoors. It doesn't make sense for you don't want to cut out the sun unless it makes sense from a business perspective. And so our main costs are in, besides labor and the energy usage of replacing the sun with LEDs. And even in this latitude, it's kind of, you probably do this in a greenhouse and just supplement the light. Like you need to control the photo period so that the plants don't flower, because then they're inedible. But a lot of times CEAs, controlled environment agriculture, is kind of pitched as this catch-all. And it really isn't applicable in certain latitudes. It's not, we went with fully indoor so that we could build basically a model that could be replicated anywhere. And it did not need this, it did not matter what the latitudinal constraints were, but that doesn't mean it necessarily has to be done indoors. But the challenges of CEA, a lot of people pitch indoor agriculture as solving the main issues of outdoor agriculture, which are the monocultures outdoors mess up the environment. There's long supply chains, there's natural disasters, but the scale issues with indoor agriculture are different, but they're just as challenging and more expensive, honestly, because you're talking about scaling up a production system which has all environmental
So
controls.
much environmental control
Yeah.
and resource use for that. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it has its own challenges, different set, but it doesn't just. I think that's a misconception that indoor ag is the answer to a lot of things, and it's really not, depending on what latitude or what crop you're doing. It might be.
Yeah, you have to find the right fit for it. And you're creating a model to understand how production looks of this particular crop and using seawater here, like you said, to transport somewhere else, and hopefully it provides an example for people to plug it in where it's really useful, most beneficial. Cool.
I'd also say we're not committed. It's like we didn't start a CEA company. We have grown outdoors and indoors, and CEA is a good model. It's a good way to build a model, but it doesn't mean that if you do a big farm in Israel or something, it needs to be totally indoors. So
yeah, do you currently, or do you see in the future, like hybridizing your production to between indoor and controlled environment?
yes, because the indoor is really good for fresh produce because you can put it next to a marketplace. You can grow year round, and you can control the quality much better than you can outdoors, and you can speed up the cycle time, right? But a lot of people are interested in seawater agriculture because of the free resources I just talked about, whether it's seawater and CO2, and they don't have to. They're more interested in raw materials, and so there's no chance that you're growing fiber or pharmaceuticals or biofuels at scale indoors, and so those types of projects will have to be done outdoors. We did an outdoor project in Asia on these salinized rice paddies, and we're going back in December to scale that project up. But if you're going for fresh produce, it makes sense to be indoors. If you're going for raw materials, it doesn't make any sense.
Excellent. So there might be a point where you're kind of doing both. That brings up another really great point as we kind of get into your background and how you got to this stage in your business. I've watched you become like an absolute expert, and I know you're modest also, so you probably wouldn't admit to it, but but I've seen it happen. You become an expert in your field, understanding so many different aspects of the business. Why has that helped you be successful, and why is it important to do that?
I think a lot of people, when I first started doing this, it was unlike my job at a restaurant, which was a lot of fun. But when people ask this is for anyone that works here, and they ask what we do for a living, and they're like, keep doing that. What just keep working on it. And so there's a lot of motivation that came out of other people saying, continue working on this. And you kind of are forced to learn all the aspects of the business if you want it to keep going. Someone told me that businesses don't fail, they just run out of money. And so the only way not to run out of money is to have a business that sustains itself, and to learn every aspect of it so that you can do all the jobs. And
Understanding the business well enough to pivot if you need to, and to fill in where you need to, and all those types of things. I just think that's an important point to this whole process of you getting to where you are in agriculture in general. It's important that we all understand diversification and kind of leverage that where possible. It seems to be a modern way to getting by, So
right, there's something to be said about trying to become expert in one. It's a strange thing to try to be an expert in, like this niche crop. But in a weird way, um, trying to learn everything about one particular field, allow people then ask you questions about sort of other fields. And I'm not qualified to talk about controlled environment agriculture with a bunch of many years of experience, but it's trying to become an expert in one thing, which allows opportunities to open up. And so, yeah, that's a strange way of putting it, but if you try really hard at one aspect, people will end up asking you questions about sort of broader and broader topics.
Yeah, pushing your boundaries a little bit.
Yeah.
So thinking in those terms, where do you think, and I know this is a big question for everybody involved in controlled environment agriculture, even those who are considered experts and maybe more experienced than you have a difficult time answering. But just anecdotally, what's your thoughts on where controlled environment ag is headed and where it needs to go?
Last week I did a webinar with IKEA on this, and they were the tough critic of CEA, and they're saying, look, there is no reason for you to replace the sun unless you're in very specific latitudes that have a 6-hour photoperiod or something like that. And that's not unreasonable. I mean, CEA is pitched all the time as the antidote to outdoor monocultures for crops. But the reality is that indoor monoculture has a lot of problems too. And replacing the sun is such an expensive proposition. And so last week before the webinar, we have interns from NC State and CFC and Ava Marie University in Florida, right, this summer. And we gave them the task of calculating the carbon footprint of Heron farms.
Okay.
And we ended up sort of right in the middle of a lot of CEA footprints, which is that they need to use like 150 watts per square meter. And that will correspond to like 10 to 15 pounds of carbon dioxide emitted per pound of biomass grown.
Okay.
It's a terrible ratio. And that's why folks are saying CEA, it really needs to fix some of the energy inputs before it can go scaling across the globe, because a lot of the problems that it aims to help with, it sort of causes.
Yeah. And this is a complete, I feel like we could talk for an entire day on this topic together, energy, and then also, just different points of the business as well. But it seems almost as though, with so much energy, not energy, but momentum, behind controlled environment agriculture, that it might be poised to drive some of the reduction in energy use and
Right.
reimagining the efficiency of energy production for us. It might be required.
Right.
So
It gets indoor ag right now is getting all this venture capital. And a lot of the greenhouse growers are saying, hey, look, we're using the sun still and we're using a few lights supplementally, but look at our profitability compared to a completely vertical indoor farm. And they're not wrong in bringing those up. It's just that there's a lot of momentum right now towards vertical ag. It's kind of sexy for a VC firm. And a lot of these investors are coming in, they have no experience in ag, especially in vertical ag, because it's such a new field. And yeah, we're seeing some really crazy valuations.
yeah, it seems just like maybe a cautionary tale for those who are interested in getting involved in it, just to be cognizant of the challenges the reality of the challenges that do exist as you enter into this, but also the excitement of being part of something that's really driving the train through into the future of what what agriculture has the capabilities to do. So very cool. I didn't mention this, but if you do have any questions as we go, please feel free to enter them into the chat and share with the group. And I will take some moments here as we transition from our conversation to the tour to answer those questions and do the best we can to keep up with those as we go along. We also have a question and answer session towards the end of this, where we'll just kind of open it up and for discussion. But please ask any questions that you may have. We will shortly here be taking a trip into the farm and getting a look at how production looks here and how you built this new facility. before we do that, you've grown in a couple of different scenarios, right?
Mhm.
So I think the group is really interested in, what options there are for hydroponics. Your experience kind of can help inform decisions people make, maybe, so where'd you farm before, and what were the pluses and minuses?
We've done deep water culture, ebb and flow, and nutrient film technique, which are kind of the main three of besides aeroponics of growing plants indoors.
Okay. And aeroponics is kind of
It's
gone to the wayside to some degree.
Yeah, it has. I mean, there are some companies in Asia that are look, aeroponics, spraying the roots is really, you get even more control than you do in hydroponics, right? But unfortunately, roots they look
Yeah.
to find water and they grow into the nozzle of the aeroponic system. So there are companies that are trying to fix that, but that's a serious limitation to aeroponics, is that the roots just grow into your nozzle and you don't know that
Yeah.
your nozzle's clogged until you kill a bunch of plants. But we found that basically deep water culture is the easiest because your failure rate is so low, because in a deep water culture, the roots are suspended in water.
Okay.
It's really hard to kill plants when they're suspended in water. In ebb and flow, the water comes and goes, and if there's any sort of pump failure, you can kill all the plants. Nutrient film technique is when there's a small trickle of nutrient-rich water going along the root zone. They're all good and bad for their own reasons, but if someone is just kind of wanting to plant, which is is how I started, and how someone should start before they invest a bunch of money, is grow 50 plants in a deep water culture. That's what I would start with. Your failure rate's really low. It's just easier.
Yeah, get a sense of how the plant behaves and how the system behaves. Yeah.
Way less mechanical problems than ebb and flow or nutrient film technique. We did nutrient film technique in our shipping container farm.
Okay.
And now we're doing ebb and flow, which we'll look at. But all sorts of automation that you wouldn't need, you don't want to have to wrap your head around if you just want to learn about hydroponics.
Okay. So you've done deep water culture in a small scale. You've done shipping container farms and nutrient film technique. Now you're in ebb and flow system.
Yeah.
Right. In a larger scale warehouse. So this guy's done a little bit of everything. He's done kind of the groundwork for you all. Let's go take a look at where he is now in production. And like I said, keep the questions coming as we go. We'll make a transition from the computer in this boardroom here into the farm. So bear with me just one moment as we do that. Thank you. How are we doing? Is it?
Oh, no, that's a question.
Kyle, can you hear us?
Yeah, you just need to turn your video on, Brian, on your phone for it.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay, I'm going to pass this over to Sam. There you go.
All right, so here's the crew. How's that coming? Yeah. So we're going into what's called the fertigation area, and it's very loud. I apologize. Unplug a few pumps, but basically behind me is a decision tree, and we put our fertigation outside of the grow room because you're going to interact with your your solutions the most of anything besides the plants on the farm. And so it helps to have your floods and your any other mess ups that are going to happen from your nutrient mixing and dosing and pump routines to happen outside of the farm. And so this is our fertigation area. There's three 300-gallon reservoirs. One of them is going to propagating plants, and the other two are connected, and they're going to all of the cultivating plants that are a little bit older. And so for the first 2 weeks, we give the plants a certain solution type, and in the next 5 weeks of their grow out, they're given the next solution over. And inside of the software we use, which is called Boxcar Central, there's a user interface that allows us to control which pumps turn on from which reservoir and go to which lane corresponding to a lane in the farm. So you see a decision tree coming from 3 pumps, and those can go to any of the 6 lanes. And there's an electronic solenoid in there, which we set on a timer so that the correct lane gets the right kind of water at the right time of day. And then that all goes to the back of the brew room, which we'll go into in just a second. It comes through the wall again to another decision tree where it can go back into any of the 3 reservoirs. So the water, it's more automation than you need for a smaller farm, but this allows us to send any solution anywhere at any time of day, and to because of these flow meters, track the volume of water, and so you can tell if there's let's say a clog or a leak, because your flow meter would indicate that the volume of water that's spinning the flow sensor has changed, and there's an issue. The last thing that's happening back here, besides the dose, and those are called peristaltic pumps, and there's a bunch of cords going into this central reservoir, and based on the parameters that we set in the software, nutrients or seawater or pH up or pH down, an acid or a base, will be dosed into our reservoir, and that'll help control the parameters on the water. The water's also being chilled constantly to keep it at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. This is an ozone machine, and ozone is produced naturally during a thunderstorm. It's what happens when oxygen gets electrocuted. It basically splits O2 into single oxygen atoms, which recombine as O3. And that third oxygen atom is very unstable. And so you'll see these a lot of times in indoor farms or aquariums or zoos, somewhere where you need to sterilize and oxygenate your water to a really high level. And so because of ozone, we can bring our dissolved oxygen level in the solution up to about 35 milligrams per liter, which is 5 times what it comes out of the ocean or tap water at. And any questions here, Brian?
That's it. I think for the irrigation system. Yeah. You also have some tanks that you're doing CO2 in the road as well.
Yeah. So this is one of the problems of CEA that we talked about earlier, is that their carbon footprint is also made worse by the supplementation of CO2. And so when you grow plants indoors, you can max out the photoperiod. You can actually grow some of these plants 24 hours of light. And once you've given them all of the nutrients and dissolved oxygen they can take, the limiting factor in photosynthesis is carbon dioxide. And so that's the dirty secret of a lot of indoor farms, is that the atmospheric CO2 is about double or triple what it would be just outdoors. It's about,
It's a requirement to push the limits of that plant.
exactly. So yeah, that's how we push the plant to its potential.
I'm gonna quick grab my computer so I can see questions.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So we are going into the clean room, and this is where all the packing and post-harvest handling happens. And then here's the fun. So it's a bit loud in there now because of the HVACs and dehumidifier, but in these middle 2 aisles, there are plants that are propagating. And so each lane represents 1 week in the cycle. And so plants can move through the cycle, and once they leave propagation after 14 days, we basically play Tetris or musical chairs to basically find a spot for them, so that we're always using every level in the farm. And so there's 28 of these racks, and each rack has 6 levels. And inside of each level, there's 3 bins which contain a number of plants. And those bins are our harvestable unit. So we try to harvest 4 racks a week. There's 28 racks, 7-week cycle. That's 4 racks per week. Each rack produces anywhere between a few hundred to up to 1,000 ounces. And our best selling SKU is this 1 ounce small package. And so that's most of the packing that we're doing is into those 1 ounce packages. The rest are pound or half pounds for chefs. You can see the different stages of grow out. Like these 2 racks next to each other here have a week in between them. And I was just showing you the dosing that was outside, and all of that logic is controlled through these 2 computers. There's 2 open source computers called Raspberry Pis in there, and we program those through Boxcar to manipulate the lights, CO2, the HVAC, the humidity, etc.
One of the questions that came through is cost per plant. So one of those questions came through, and then also you harvest the same day as packaged.
Yeah. So it costs us right now anywhere between 50 and 81 cents to grow each ounce, and that then has a markup depending on the SKU and depending on the customer. It depends on the size of the order. So if we're packaging like 3,000 ounces for a large customer in the Northeast, that gets harvested one day. It sits overnight to chill, and then it gets packed, and then it sits again overnight before it gets shipped. You'll see with a lot of these indoor growers and just farms in general, they have a cold packing room. We have a chilled packing room. It's not completely refrigerated, but you can save a couple days on your shelf life just by packing your plants and harvesting them in a very cold room. And I should say, an economist at the USDA these days would say that cost per plant is actually way too low because we're not including the price of carbon. And so that's an accounting price per ounce, not a total economic price per carbon ounce that the USDA is now starting to implement into some of their economic analysis. And that's what's going to really hurt the profitability of indoor farms once they start calculating the actual footprint per ounce sold. We try to mitigate that by planting salt marshes each year, but it's an issue.
So the way you might have mentioned this before, but the way you're differentiating your propagation from your production for the system is just through what they're being fed, right? Through your irrigation system. So it's all happening in the same row. It's just a matter of what the nutrient profile is.
Yes. And the only difference is that there's still a few domes left, but in the first week, some of them are being pulled off because we've just reached a week on these propagating plants. But the only other difference is, besides the solution, is that they're getting a humidity dome. The seedlings are getting a humidity dome during that first week. We try to keep the temperature around 85 degrees Fahrenheit and the humidity as high as possible during the first couple of days. And really, the plants don't, seedlings don't need nutrients, right? They've already got all the nutrients they need inside the embryo. And so we're adding nutrients to the second week, but since it's on the same solution, our seedlings are getting a slight nutrient solution that really is unnecessary. It doesn't decrease germination, but it's not necessary during the first week.
Talk just briefly about your lights. There are different lights in here. What informed your choices on those?
So 90% of the lights in here are made by a company called Fluence in Austin, Texas. And we went with Fluence model over some of the other lights because this is an older model. This is a company called Illumatex. And the energy transfer from AC to DC happens inside of a driver. And that driver in this model is built into the light. And the driver is one of the main sources of heat. And so your problem in indoor ag is all the heat coming off of your light. So you want to minimize the heat load. And so what we like about Fluence is that they've disaggregated the driver. So you can't really see, but on top of all of these racks, we have the drivers that regulate the energy coming in through these lights. And so this gives the actual LED a smaller profile. And so we can stack
a better level and have more canopy space. But also we can keep all the heat from the LEDs on top of the rack. And that way the HVAC system, which you see at the back of the room, can mitigate that heat. All that heat is concentrated. It doesn't have to move through various levels of plants and heat up the plants as it moves towards the ceiling.
And you're using a full white light, right?
Yeah. We went with a full white light because we had previously grown with magenta or purple and red diodes and found that the purple and red diode do everything you need for photosynthesis, but a lot of growers are going away from them, and that's because you can't see the plant. There's no green light for the plant to reflect, and so a grower can't tell if their plant has a nutrient deficiency because under blue and red lights, your plants all kind of look this purplish color, and these white lights allow us, they have enough green in the spectrum for us to see the plant and therefore detect any yellowness or nutrient deficiency, etc.
A couple of questions from the panel. How long does it take from propagation to harvest?
It takes 7 weeks. Our best ever was 42 days. And it just kind of depends because in an ideal world, it'd be 7 weeks, but it doesn't always match up with your fulfillment schedule. And so maybe you have to harvest a couple days earlier for a customer and you lose a little bit on your yields, or maybe you have to wait an extra week for a big order that's coming in. And so your plants get a little bit unruly, they're harder to harvest, but we shoot for about 7 weeks.
Cool. And the other question is, what is the photo period basically when you turn the lights off?
We keep the photo period at 20 hours, even though we've done experimentation in the lab that suggests we could go up to 23 hours. So if you think about 3 extra hours per day across 49 days, that adds up to several days saved on your cycle. But our initial experiment didn't suggest that the cost savings were proportionate to the increase in yield. So it's just something we need to experiment more with. But we're at 20 hours now, which is a comfortable enough time photo period for this system.
Now it looks very clean. It looks wonderful. Talk a little bit about the necessity to, for cultural practices, so to speak, and any challenges you might have with that.
Yeah. If it weren't for ozone, the ozone machine that I showed you sterilizes the water. And it's also got a crushed glass filter that's attached to that ozone skid. And so the water is constantly being filtered. And that's why aquariums have clear water, is because these ozone machines and nano bubblers and UV light, whatever disinfectant or sterilization tool they're using, helps with the cleaning process. So we would be deep cleaning every 2 weeks if it were not for ozone. But we generally have to obviously deep clean when a rack gets flipped. So when the plants get harvested, that rack gets deep cleaned, and it won't be deep cleaned again until 7 weeks later. But cleaning is a major part of indoor farms. And this goes back to the sustainability that we were talking about. To help with cleaning, you can see that this whole thing is paneled in PVC panels. But when you scale that up, all that plastic is an issue as well. So the trade-offs of CEA are clear here.
Let's take a look at your package. Yeah. All right. And again,
Keep the questions coming, please.
So this is the pack room. I was just saying it's kept much cooler than the grow room to help with shelf life. As soon as we can get those plants cold, their metabolism slows down, and we can slow down their deterioration, basically. The pack room, like you'll see at a lot of places, has air curtains. Our walk-in cooler is right here, and it's all stainless steel appliances so that we could get harmonized GAP certification. We have harmonized GAP Plus, and there are all sorts of different logs and protocols involved with that you guys are doing a webinar on in a couple of weeks. So that'd be interesting. That's a big help for growers, because our biggest vendors, their first question is always, how much does it cost and what food safety certification do you have? So we got a lot of help from Kim Butts at CFSA, and it made us ready for GAP audit day. And we actually, on that day, were going just for GAP and ended up getting harmonized GAP Plus because of all the help that Kim had given to us along the way. And so we got a higher food safety certification than we had planned on, and that allows us to get into Whole Foods or to get into some of these bigger retailers.
Excellent. Well, one of the questions came up. How long do they stay in the pack up to cool? So how are you picking off the, bringing them down to temperature? And what is the temperature?
The temperature in here is 62, and we are going to get a cool bot so we can bring it down to about 50. Some people's pack rooms are all the way down at 40 because you want to cool them down as fast as possible. We try to let them sit in cold storage after they've been packed for at least 12 to 24 hours to bring them down to 40 degrees so that once they hit the truck, which is also 40 degrees, there's not too much temperature change from that point of leaving our walk-in to the walk-in of the customer. Because, let's say your pallet is sitting outside for 10 minutes before it goes into the refrigerated vehicle. That 10 minutes can change the temperature of the cases on the outside of the pallet. Those plants start to, the humidity changes inside the packaging, and you start to get moisture issues.
And as part of your certification or even part of the requirements to your customers, you have to maintain the cold chain, which has to prove that.
Yeah, it depends on the customer. Most customers, you don't have to prove it, but with they're not a customer of ours, but in the case of Publix or in the case of Whole Foods, they will at times take the temperature of your vehicle when it shows up, and they will ask to see your logs of your. So we have to, with GAP, we record our refrigerated room's temperature every day, and a lot of customers will ask about it. But even if you're getting away with breaking the cold chain, it's just hurting you because it's hurting your shelf life. And when you buy a pack of strawberries and a couple of them are past their date, a lot of times you won't buy it. You'll pick a different brand, you'll pick a different package, or you won't buy them at all. And so shelf life is a major point in any animal.
This is a good point to mention this, but the SBDC does have a workshop scheduled for food safety on the 16th. So however you find out about this workshop, take a look. And maybe you can tap into that and learn a little bit more about gas regulation. I'm thinking, other questions in here. Let's see. You built a lot of standard operating procedures into the program. You've gone from just a couple of people growing these crops and processing these crops to a team of packs in there. Talk a little bit about moving from the point of the individual smaller scale. We're still considered small scale, but scaling up a little bit. Challenges there with production and processing.
Well, we just saw that some of the team sitting outside, and they're working on part of our fulfillment flow. What we're trying to solve today is how we prepare for surge orders. And so sometimes you get a customer that only wants a couple orders per month, but they give you a week heads up, and you have to do a really lumpy week of production. So a normal day is a few hundred to 1,000 ounces, but they want 3,000 on one day, and that causes some issues in your workflow. But in general, the team, the main issue is just that we don't automate. Nothing's automated yet. We're not at the scale where we're using a labeler or a packing machine, and so the redundancy of basically agriculture and light manufacturing, which this is kind of like a weird combination of the two, can just kind of bring down morale. And that's a big part of what I've learned in growing our team, is that we have to make sure we split up the tasks appropriately so that everybody has to do some days of labeling all day, but some days of working on sort of higher level projects. And so they don't feel like a machine, because a lot of what we need to do is very redundant.
Okay. And the folks that you're working with, I mean, this is a farm that follows a different business pathway that many farms that quite familiar with. People that you're working with, you know, you're offering them competitive wages and a more full spectrum approach to being part of the team, so to speak, which is what we are seeing in a lot of smaller scale farms. I think there's, you know, there's just a host of different things to consider with your team versus a larger production team, you know, where we're using different modes of labor.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that. Like, how is your business different than other businesses? That, of course, we already know a million different ways, you know, but as far as the business model.
Well, I mean, there's a reason that they buy labor is so specialized. Like, one group of people harvest, one, and maybe the same group, but then they pack, then they label, and in terms of attracting the labor force around here, we basically have production assistant roles, which are seed, harvest, pack, label, fulfillment. But that might only be 60% of your work week, and the other 40% is under your umbrella or your title. And so someone is working on plant science. So they're doing production 60% of the time, but the other 40% are doing plant science or quality control or farm ops management, etc. And so that is not the traditional capitalist way of doing things. It'd probably be easier at the next scale to just have people who strictly pack and have people who strictly do plant science. But at our scale, you want to keep everybody involved in the bigger picture. And one way to do that is to give them a specialized role outside of production.
Excellent. So yeah, you're providing a little more attractive. Okay, we're going to go back to the conference room.
Okay.
So Amanda, we are open still to the questions. Keep the questions rolling here.
Okay, are we back in business? Start video. How's that? Can we see Sam? Just close down out of here. And are we good? Okay. There we go. Okay. So we kind of, and you can hear us, thumbs up. Okay, thank you. We kind of started to talk about this, and you were talking about it in terms of your labor, but your business is different. I mean, you have you glossed over the sort of sustainable issue a little bit, and you also glossed over, you know, your sort of projected impact on the environment through different programming you have. Talk a little bit about that. I think that I think it is important for farms, new farms that are entering into the business to approach it with a more holistic approach, and you're doing that. So tell us some ways.
Well, for example, we just got into Google's Sustainable Development Goals startup. It's kind of like a boot camp of sorts. Mm. And when you go into one of those programs, you know, they're
they're asking about the sustainability of the farm, and that includes the emissions.
Mhm.
And so indoor ag has gotten itself into a position where it can't hold up that side of the argument yet, because the emissions are so great compared to outdoors per head of lettuce or whatever is being grown. Not to mention the CO2 supplementation that we're talking about. And so instead of what a lot of CEA growers are saying is that, look, we're kind of in the same stage that computers were in 1960. This is going to get much cheaper to do, and the energy efficiency of the LEDs and the HVAC are going to make the whole system not only more profitable, but the toll on the environment will be much less. But what we're arguing is that instead of waiting on efficiencies to speed up, let's just replant, in our case, salt marsh as a 1-to-1 ratio for the amount of food sold. And so this would be, in like an old school business textbook, this would be a very bad idea, because we're increasing the cost of production because we have to replant salt marsh for every pound sold.
Yeah.
But what we're finding, and I think we're seeing this in other companies, Patagonia now offers a beer that replants a tree for every 6-pack. Coors Light now offers an 18-pack where they'll replenish 500 gallons of river water. Ecosia is becoming one of the most popular search engines. They replant a tree for every search. And so strictly on an Excel sheet, from a cost perspective, offsetting your emissions by replanting the marsh like we do looks like bad business. But we hear all the time from customers that it's a major part of the value proposition for why they're buying every week. And it's definitely a major part of why we attract young folks to work here from different universities, because they care about that restorative part too. And by putting the restoration, instead of paying a nonprofit to do the restoration, since we do it in-house, we're incentivized to do it more efficiently. And so we've built, instead of doing it by hand this year, we'll do it from dropping seeds from a drone, which is way cheaper than sending 10 people out in a boat into one of these marshes.
And also very progressive and fascinating too. It's sitting over there, right? I asked your team when I came in about that, and so that's an exciting move. But yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I kind of wanted to touch on how you get that different labor force that we were talking about, and the requirements of that labor force. How are you attracting them? And not only are you setting your business up for greater success with some of these programs that you're doing, or policies, practices, ethos, but you're also bringing that team that you need because of that as well. So it's something that we see a lot of startup businesses doing, and now I think farm businesses doing it. So it's kind of a different approach, that people that are entering into it early these days, or now are doing. So. Do we have any other questions out there? We've covered quite a bit of ground, and anywhere from the business approach to production to the history. So please chime in if you have any questions for Sam. Anywhere from how do you build a facility to how do you run a business. While people are thinking of their questions, Sam, what's next? What's next for Heron Farms? What's the next big thing?
Oh, well,
that you can talk about.
I
don't know.
They're not exciting enough to keep secret, but we obviously are working on different crops.
Okay.
So we wanted to kind of do the Coca-Cola model, where you just work on one product obsessively and try to get good at it before you work on the other products. And so now we're not really good at this product yet, but we're getting there to a point where we're at least experimenting now with 2 other crops. These are both edible halophytes, just like sea beans, that we've heard chefs ask for the most. These are just like sea beans. These are crops that are typically foraged a few months a year, that kind of have the same characteristics that are good for indoor ag, so high water content, short cycle time, short canopy. They have to be an annual. They have to germinate fast, type of thing. And then the other,
That's a great little chunk of information though, by the way, because everybody asks the question, hey, what can I grow? And you can grow anything,
yeah,
but people choose to grow certain things because
Yeah.
of those characteristics you just outlined, you know?
well, like in last week's webinar, the main question was, is indoor ag really solving anything, or is it just for leafy greens? And it's not just for leafy greens, but we break it down into 3 requirements that a crop has to have for indoor ag, and those are harvest index, how much of the plant biomass that you grow is edible or usable, what is the market price, and what is the cycle time. So like cannabis has a really small harvest index because you're selling a dried form of just the flower, but it has a very high market price. And so if you can use those 3 metrics, you can figure out if this is appropriate, if your crop is appropriate for indoors. So lettuce has an okay market price, but it's 96% water, has a really fast cycle time, and it evolved on the forest floor. It doesn't really need that much light. So the folks that are saying that we're going to grow wheat in some skyscraper in Detroit, that's probably not going to happen anytime soon.
In a profitable
way. But yeah, you can certainly do any crop you want. We are working next as a part of an outdoor farm to produce plant-based salts. And so that's one of the things we're working on next is when seawater comes through one of these plants, it changes the ratio of sodium to chloride, and it makes salt from a halophyte healthier than salt from table salt, because it's the same amount of salt, but the sodium content's reduced. And so we're seeing that as a potential new avenue, kind of more of that has to be done outdoors because the cost would be too high here. But you don't need to have a high quality produce. You just need to grow the plant biomass and dry it out.
Yeah, excellent. So another wonderful example of a farm looking into the value-added route is a way to sort of create another revenue stream for yourself. That's great, and it's very tasty. As I mentioned earlier, I tried a little bit when I came in. So excellent. I've got a couple questions here before we part ways. I'm not sure what's the cost. Oh, to get started, I see the second part of that question. So these I think could be asked together. What's the cost to get started? And then also, how small can you start? What's the system size wise? So
that is the how small can you start is such a great question, because your tendency is to go bigger than you should.
Right.
Everyone in this industry, from my perspective, is going bigger than they should.
Yeah, start with a 100,000 square foot warehouse.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the main problem with that is that the change in manufacturing of LED diodes is happening so fast that a farm who writes a business plan in 2018 and buys lights, $1 million worth of lights in 2018, realizes in 2018 and a half or 2019 that they just spent a whole lot of money on lights that are no longer that is like they're like blockbuster. And so I would start as small as possible. I mean, we convince young folks to literally start with 1 plant and try not to kill that plant before it goes to seed, and see how hard all of the controls are. And people want to go straight into production mode, and they really should start, like this question is asked, at the smallest scale possible, which is 1 plant. And we actually start smaller than that, which is just with a seed and a petri dish. And and we do plenty of, we learn a lot just out of petri dishes, and those, it saves you so much time and effort from messing up on a larger scale. And the other question about the cost, 61% of the cost of that farm came from just the lights. Okay. All the construction and all the things we went through were not as expensive as just the lights. And so the cost of doing this, if I were you, I would start with a light or 2. Actually, we've got some extras. If someone in the comments, they can just come by and borrow them so that there's no cost to them. But I would start, if you can, by using some of the sun or using 1 or 2 lights before you go crazy buying all these LEDs before you understand
Yeah, get started and take it slow in the beginning. Yeah, get good at what you do.
Multiple cycles, you know,
Yeah.
people, one good cycle either tells you that you're good or that you're really lucky. You know, I would get a couple
Yeah.
cycles going
Yeah.
and feel confident before you go from we went from one plant to 72 to 4,800 inside the shipping container.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few 100,000 plants in that room.
Yeah.
And I would not rescale that fast.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for that answer, and thank you everybody for their questions. As we part here, I want to make sure that everyone can get in touch with Sam if they'd like to. I know you've been gracious enough to be a resource for folks in the past and have had open doors. So I'm hoping that applies here. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, you can find Sam where?
Yeah, they could email sam@heronfarms.com or come by this farm, and that proposition about the lights still stands. We donate lights that we don't use anymore to CFC and small interns and growers that just want to get started and don't want to fork over a few $100s for one light bar.
Excellent. That's fantastic because it is cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
So sam@heronfarms.com.
Yeah.
All right. I'm putting it in the chat, everybody. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. This is recorded and will be sent out afterwards along with a survey. So please make sure you fill that out for us. Give us a sense of what you learned today and how we can always be improving ourselves. Thank you, Sam, so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's always good to sit down and chat with you. Kyle, thank you very much. What's that?
Brian didn't mention that
Sam.
he helped build some of the farms. So thank you for helping.
It's nice to it's nice to see it after it's all been finished and doing well. So I laughed at some blood, sweat, and tears in there of mine as well.
There's a
So
lot of sweat.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day today. And we'll see you again soon.